Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Project Management TV. I'm your host, John Hyde from PublicSectorPM.com, and today we have a special guest called Darren Holford. So, Darren, if I can hand over to you and just ask you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're working at the moment, and what's your special interest in project management? What topics are you really interested in?
Okay, thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me. So I work as an IT project manager. I've been working in IT for 15 years, project management for a bit more than 10. I spent a lot of time in banking in my early years, core systems, manufacturing with Dell. I'm now working in the pharmaceutical sector. I run a project management office, regulatory systems. What am I most interested in? I'm interested in everything, but I suppose one of my passions is talking about project management, is training, mentoring, trying to raise awareness of project management as a practice and as a profession, and trying to generally improve project management wherever I go. That's basically where I sit.
Excellent. So you're a true project management evangelist then, by the sound of things.
Absolutely. I've always wanted to be a project manager. Have been for quite a while. I have the scars, and I enjoy getting the scars.
Great. Okay. Well, today then, thanks for joining us. Today we are going to do a bit of a Christmas special, given the time of year. So we thought we would look at the amazing annual project by Santa Claus to deliver toys for children all around the world, and in fact before that to produce toys for children all around the world. So that's quite a challenge. Now Santa seems to pull this off every year without fail, and I think from a project management perspective there's clearly got to be some pretty robust, effective techniques behind that feat. So I thought perhaps today we could have a think about how Santa does it, what sort of approach he takes, what project management approach, and then we'll have a think about perhaps some of the risks and how he might track progress and all the other project management-y things that work behind the scenes. So to begin with, I thought we would have a chat about the frameworks and the methodologies that he might use. So there's two aspects to this annual challenge. Like I said before, there's the first stage, which is the production of toys, and then there's the delivery phase, which is going to kick off very soon, in about 11 days, I think. So, Darren, would you like to have a stab at suggesting what sort of frameworks he might have in place for which aspects of the challenge? What do you think?
So, if I was Santa and I was looking at this as a project, I'd probably set it up firstly as a program. I think there's many different aspects to it, as you've mentioned. You know, from very high level, we have the production, then we have the delivery. Before that, I suppose we need to understand who our customers are, because I think this would change every year with new boys and girls coming on, and with some moving on as they get older. And I think that from a project management perspective, there would be many different areas of project management we could draw upon. For terminology, we're talking about a framework. For example, we could use the PMI or the Prince2 framework without a problem. Okay. You know, start looking at your stakeholders, start understanding who's who, what we have to do, what's the whole scope of what we're doing. Once we've gone through the basics and we've got an understanding of the scope and the separate projects within a program, I would then work with my project managers to understand the best way to tackle each of them. When it comes to production, I'd be looking at the Six Sigma practices, for example, business process improvement. How do we structure our supply chain end to end? How do we ensure that we've got continuous improvement built into it over the year as we build more toys out? From a delivery perspective, again, I suppose it's the end of the supply chain. we'd want to do a very, very big risk analysis on that, because we have an extremely short time frame, and we'd want to have very good contingency practices in place, because we won't have the time to fix it. We need to immediately get on with the job. I think we have as you said, we start in 11 days and we finish in 12.
Indeed.
24 hours to deliver to the world.
So I think you're right, because there is such a diverse range of tasks that sit behind the whole accomplishment. Then a program management approach that wraps across the top, that definitely sounds sensible. I was thinking about right up front at the design stage for the toys, and I was wondering whether there might be an opportunity to get agile with that. So I was wondering whether perhaps we might prototype some toys. Maybe the elves can knock something together in wood, and then perhaps there's another group of elves who would have a play about with the toys, do a bit of an evaluation, and then feed back to the design team. So we do a bit of rapid prototyping of toys.
Sure. Yeah.
And then maybe once we've actually finalized our design, I was wondering whether, as we go into mass production, whether that would be the end of Agile effectively, and then moving into things like, as you say, Six Sigma, or would there still be a role for Agile, do you think, once we're into production? What's your take on that?
It's an interesting one. I mean, I think from a lot of people's perspective, they would look at production as an operational task, project task, if you want to draw a very clear line. But I believe there is a quite a large grey area. There's no reason we can't bring disciplines and approaches from project management into an operational environment. For example, you may not need to come forward with a strict Scrum approach, one of the Agile variants, but there's no reason you couldn't manufacture using a Scrum technique. 4-week sprints for one particular toy. A scrum of scrums to get particular flavours of toys, through the production process, especially if it's a manual production process with all these elves building wooden toys and painting wooden toys, etc., etc. You'd have 4 week sprints. You have your evaluation at the end with your retrospective. Then we go back to our product backlog and see what's still there. Through that, there's no reason we can't have Six Sigma practices applied, so we're always looking for continuous improvement for the next sprint through a retrospective, etc. I can see that there would be a place for it. I've never really worked on the operations side. I've worked with a lot of operational people to deliver projects and improvements for operations. So I don't know if there's an operational practice that would maybe fit with that or be better, but certainly we could apply project management approaches and disciplines to this task.
Tell me about the retrospective, because we've done. Would the retrospective come on us? What sort of frequency would it come on? Would you do it weekly, or at the end of a scrum of scrums? How would it work?
Again, it depends on whether you're following the formalised Scrum approach. I mean, if the formalised, it's the end of the sprint. But if we're also introducing Six Sigma practices, then we can decide at any time. One of our product items can be an evaluation stage. Maybe that's at the end of each day, each week. I don't know. It's also going to depend on what our approach to quality will be. I work in a pharmaceutical environment where quality is number one. Without quality, we don't do anything. And we build quality into every step we take on every day that we work. Okay, so we're managing projects as well as operations, but even within our projects, there are massive quality steps we take all the way through it that until I'd worked in pharmaceuticals, I'd never encountered that level. Generally, it was a plan quality at the start. Hopefully it's occurring during the monitoring and control stage, and then we just make sure it was definitely there at the end and do a lessons learnt. But I think for this, definitely at the end of the sprint, you could roll that up into your scrum of scrums, but if you're also introducing Six Sigma approaches then more frequently, and again use it as a product backlog item and bring it in.
And just to clarify, the actual purpose of the retrospective is all about. So there's a big quality element. Do the products that have been produced in the last sprint meet our criteria? And also, would you use that moment to reflect on working practices and perhaps do a bit of business engineering on your actual production approach, or the work that you've done during the sprint? So if you can see process improvements, would you pick those up in a retrospective? Yeah.
Most definitely. I don't know what other PMs do, but for myself, I like to look at all elements. From a people perspective, team perspective, are we working together the best? From an agile, self-managing, self-leading. Is our Scrum Master doing their job of removing the obstacles and keeping the team, or letting the team focus on what they need to deliver? We could also look at the process perspective. Are we doing the steps in the right way with the best people? Should we be bringing in any more specific experts? Are we over capacity? Well, what is it we're doing? You can look at everything, but again, we have a very short time frame. We need to get on with the job. Retrospective should be complete, but they shouldn't take forever.
Yeah.
And I think one of the elements I like about Agile is that it allows you to continually improve as you move through your sprints. And done is done. It doesn't mean perfect, but it's done and it's ready. So yeah, we could definitely bring a lot of different aspects into the retrospective side. But people, process, practice.
Great. You mentioned the word quality. And its importance within the pharmaceuticals. Now, I think quality is going to be paramount to Santa as well. The last thing we want is wheels falling off scooters and children getting injured. So I think there's going to be a significant amount of quality planning up front. And, of course, the associated risk assessment, particularly around product design. I think each product will be assessed for any possible weaknesses which could lead to injury.
Sure.
But I guess coming up with a sound quality plan as well, so making sure that adequate testing steps are taken at the right time in the project. So I can see there's going to be a great deal of quality planning going on in Lapland. Yes, okay. Well, we've talked a bit then about frameworks and methodologies. So we've got some potential to include Agile. We've got the potential for some Six Sigma to manage the improvement of our production processes. I'm just thinking now, what else is Santa going to be focusing on as he initiates the project? So he's selected his project management tools. What does he need to do to get this whole thing going? So he's going to be doing some planning, as we've already mentioned. But what other things do you think, Darren, he ought to spend some time on?
If I'm Santa, communications would be a huge, especially again with the time constraints. He's going to have a lot of letters coming in. A lot of letters written by young children with different levels of writing skill. So it's not just the matter of, okay, how do we open the letters, read the letters, ensure that we're getting everything off that list, but it's also, can we decipher those letters? Should we be getting everything off that list? Because as I've seen, I have a 6-year-old boy, and sometimes those lists are very, very long and not always feasible for Santa to deliver. We can't bring everyone 10 puppies and a new car and a new bike and a new sleigh and etc., etc., etc. So there's going to be a need, good communication planning and good vetting within that communications. You're talking
about constraints, aren't you? With the
I'm talking about constraints.
yes, yeah. So there's only a certain amount of space on the sleigh, presumably.
Yes.
And Santa and the elves only have a certain level of resources to produce all of the presents. So absolutely, getting those constraints down.
And there's the naughty and the nice side also. You know, which letter goes into which pile. So there's going to be continual feedback loops with the parents.
Naughty and nice, yeah. That's I think that's quite a tricky one. What criteria Santa uses to determine naughty and nice? I think we're probably wandering into the realms of philosophy with that question.
Well, as a project manager,
I'm going to leave that problem up to Santa, basically. So that's a black box as far as we're concerned. Apart from some obvious stuff like children not bashing each other, that sort of thing. But yeah, okay. So we've got communications. You've mentioned some key stakeholders as well.
Sure.
I wonder if there are some other stakeholders we haven't picked up on yet. So you've covered parents, clearly a critical stakeholder. Children themselves. Now then, the communication, I suppose, is going to be pretty one way, is it, between the children and Santa? They send the letter in, Santa does his process, comes up with his list of valid presents. Does he communicate back? Maybe he'll leave a little note on the presents. So that might go into the communication plan. Other stakeholders, though, any spring to mind to you?
Delivering the letters, whether that be the National Post Delivery Service or the DHLs, the UPSs. He's also going to need to communicate with his suppliers, his supply chain. That's going to be constantly changing. You need to communicate. Getting back to stakeholders, I think I talk to a lot of project managers, and we talk about stakeholder management, and we talk about what types of stakeholders. And ironically, generally one of the biggest stakeholders, in my personal view, that are missed is the project team. These are critical stakeholders. Yeah, they're not the customer, they're not the supplier, they're not the end user, but without them, we do nothing. So I think we need to have include the elves and the helpers onto this stakeholder list, and we need to ensure that we're managing their needs also, especially when we come to the back end of the project where time is of the essence and there's going to be a lot of stress. We need to make sure that we're managing that we've got enough capacity. But also, I always find it amusing that team is usually either forgotten or the last one on the list.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I was in a meeting yesterday. We were looking at a stakeholder communications plan, and there were all these third-party organisations listed, and somebody put their hand up and said, "Hang on a sec, aren't you going to talk to us?"
Hello.
Yeah, indeed.
It's quite amusing.
Well, I'll just chuck onto the pile the reindeer.
Of course.
Without the reindeer, the sleigh isn't going anywhere.
Very good.
But on the actual analysis then, once you've identified your stakeholders, do you have a preferred method for, any tips for Santa on actually figuring out which stakeholders he ought to be focusing his energies on?
I like to group my stakeholders into the naughty and nice. There are stakeholders that will benefit and will aid my project, or the project, I should say, and there are often those that will become obstacles or are issues. So that's one of my first steps. I then like to group my stakeholders into different groups. For example, related groups, and I like to understand how they interact. A good example here would be the parents and the children, those that are interacting on a daily basis. If I see project stakeholders in a real world like that, I try and use that for my communication, more of the indirect communication. and also for the stakeholder management to try and work on setting expectations, etc. How else do I do it? So the good, the bad, the interrelated groups. Then I suppose we look at strengths. Obviously, my sponsor is one of the strongest person from a stakeholder point of view, and I need to make sure that the stakeholder is managed well, they're communicated to well in a timely manner, and that it's a good two-way communication. And I think from stakeholder management and communication management, this is very, very important. Communication is two ways. You must build in feedback loops. You must make sure your message is received as you intended it. Again, which I see in a lot of more junior project managers, this seems to be forgotten, or at least it hasn't been learnt yet. Okay. So to Santa, I would say make sure that you've got that dimension under control.
So we want to see a nice a stakeholder, some kind of stakeholder log where we've mapped out naughty, nice, influence, how interested they are in the project, blah blah blah, and then the communications plan, the communications actions that hang off each stakeholder. Yeah, that sounds like a good approach. I think the other thing I was wondering about was the project planning process. So planning the entire program from start to end. I've mapped out a couple of the key bits of activity between kicking off the process each year through to the completion of the exercise. So I've got things. We've talked about reindeer. I've got an action around testing the equipment, obviously making sure that the reindeer are fit and happy, making sure that the sleigh does actually fly. Then we've got other equipment as well, testing the sack, making sure there are no holes. So that whole quality thing that we spoke about.
Sure.
And then actually some of the logistics around the delivery I started to think about, and I started to think for the plan, would Santa need to do a huge shop and stock up with food and drink for the trip? And then I realized, of course, no, because it's all left on the doorstep. So it's good news for the capacity of the sleigh. So then progress monitoring was the next thing I wanted to talk about. Once Santa's actually in flight, there's an element of wanting to track his progress, and also how might we progress monitor the production side of things, so stepping back again to the production side. So do you have any thoughts on progress monitoring and how we might try and do a bit of control on this exercise?
It'd be interesting. From a simplistic point of view, he's got X number of houses to visit and X number of presents to deliver to those houses. But you could also look at it in terms of number of countries complete or distance travelled. You probably want to monitor both or all of those dimensions. So number of houses visited still to come, number of miles travelled still to come, because you want to be able to ensure that you're also monitoring the fuel or the feed for the reindeer, the maintenance on the sleigh. You're also going to need to monitor the weather patterns around the world at the time, because that could interrupt that smooth flow, whatever's been planned ahead. You're also going to need to think about things like breakages. As good as Santa is, there's going to be some rough landings. It's a big sack in there. Potential loss, there's a lot of snow in a lot of countries, especially where I am at the moment in Germany.
Squeezing down narrow chimneys.
Well, there is that, how much lost time has there been between the chimney houses and the non-chimney houses, etc. But I mean, you put that into your planning, I would hope. But at the end of the day, now you want to monitor against that plan, at least the delivery plan. I think number of houses, number of presents, kilometres travelled, breakages, lost, children still awake. This could be an interesting one, because if they're still awake, you can't deliver. You need to wait till they're back asleep.
I think that's where the special sleeping dust comes in.
Of course, yes. My apologies. I've not watched enough Santa movies recently.
Right. Okay. What about production side then? Monitoring, making sure that we're kind of up to our plan, on target in terms of producing enough toys by the right time. So I started thinking about whether we might use some sort of weekly progress review with the production team. So maybe once a week, get the elves together, and again use that list that you mentioned. Total number of presents required, and basically just take a check. How many have we produced to date? And perhaps from that you can produce. I'm not sure about this, but could you produce some kind of velocity chart or a burn down chart, agile style, to monitor whether or not we're on track? What do you think?
I think you definitely could. In fact, it'd be a very good fit from one to the other. I think you also need to monitor material usage. So yes, we're producing what we said we produce in the time we said we produce it, but are we doing it with the planned number of materials or volume of materials? Getting back to quality, are we producing that level with the quality expectations that we had? Or do we need to feed that back into our process change or our retrospective? We'd also want, again, looking back at the team, yes, we're producing the amount, we're using the right materials, we've got the right quality. How is the team feeling? Are they underworked, overworked, burning out? How is this working? What's our absenteeism? And is that growing or shrinking or what?
No one likes to see an overworked elf, do they?
No, they're terrible. Absolutely terrible. Very grumpy.
Yeah. Okay. I do have a tip on the tracking Santa's progress as he delivers presents. If you go to noradsanta.org,
yes,
there is a real-time delivery tracking system, which is quite impressive. The technology seems to be coming on each year.
Very good.
I think there's an actual Santa cam now, so I'll be glued to that on the 24th.
Very good.
Okay. Right, that's a pretty good coverage of the sort of processes we want to use. We've thought about the production side, we've thought about delivery. I think finally, if we might turn our attention to risks. So just have a quick brainstorm about what sort of things could potentially trip Santa up. So what's he going to have on his risk log? What's he going to be monitoring throughout the whole year, from the production to the delivery? So off the top of my head, I was thinking of risks like, heaven forbid, but some kind of sleigh malfunction. That just gives me nightmares. The idea of the sleigh, all those presents being spilled somewhere. So watch out for that. That's got to go on the log. I think delivering presents to children who don't deserve them, I mean, that's a serious risk. We don't tell children that they've got to be good for no reason. There are consequences.
Very good.
Any from you? Any risks you can see that need to go on the log?
Again, back to the team. Overworked elves. My supply chain is going to be very, very important. I need the materials on time at the right place, the right volumes. I need to ensure that I'm receiving all the letters, that I'm understanding all the letters. I need to make sure Mrs. Claus is very happy, because I've got a long year ahead of me. It's going to be very stressful, especially towards the end of it when everyone's celebrating. We're working hard, if I'm Santa.
I can see some big risks there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Upsetting Mrs. Claus is pretty much the last thing you want to do. So,
yes.
As Santa, you've got to monitor your own work-life balance, I think.
Very much so, and I think that translates over to the real project world also. You need to there's a time to be a hero. You know, I think we've all worked on projects where, you know, heroes are needed, but you can't, or you shouldn't, I don't believe, be the hero every day, all day. You will just burn yourself out. You need to be able to step back. And you also need to look after yourself just personally. You know, you need to give yourself your downtime. You need to look after your health. I think that's going to be very important for Santa. You know, for someone that's about to do a 24-hour round-the-world trip with a lot of chimney dives, he needs to be healthy and you know, sound body, sound mind. He needs to watch his diet over the Christmas period with all those cookies and milk that have been left out for him, plus maybe other beverages. And I think he also needs to plan post-project, some definite downtime and some celebration time, you know, with the team, for himself, and to also sort of sit back and reflect on how that year went. I think, again, within a project, that's not often done, where, you know, you plan up to the end of the project and the delivery, but do you plan after that, other than maybe a bedding down, handing over to operations time?
Yeah.
Do you plan the let's sit back and philosophize maybe, but, you know, more than just a lessons learnt? Do you plan the releasing of the team, the elves, to go on holiday? These sorts of things.
Does he keep a few presents back for the elves, perhaps?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he'd have to have a secret elf production plant, I think, because you don't want the elves knowing what they're going to get.
True.
You
Yeah.
know, I built this, now I'm being given it. That doesn't work.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I reckon we've pretty much cracked it then. We've kind of got a plan. We've looked at risks. We've looked at how to monitor progress. I reckon we've touched all bases. So I think on that note, I will thank you ever so much for participating in our Christmas special.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hopefully maybe Santa will have watched this. I'll send him a link so he can pick up any tips. So before we go, Darren, do you just want to let anybody who's watching know how they can contact you?
Sure. I can give you my personal email account. If they can contact through you, I'm happy for you to give that on, and I'm happy to talk about project management all day, every day. I'm very passionate about it. So thank you again for inviting me, and let's hope Santa is listening to us and maybe picks up some tips.
That's my pleasure. Yeah. So thank you everyone for watching as well. Merry Christmas to everybody, and we will see you in the new year. Okay.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Bye.
Ciao.